is from the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verses 1 through 11 and 15 through 18. After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken, "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them and warming himself. This ends the reading.
We heard earlier in our first reading that being family to Jesus is about doing and not speaking. I'm sure most families have some version of words being emptier than actions. My son knows that LeBron James's mother always told him when he was growing up, "Don't talk about it, be about it." In my own house, my children are familiar with the expression, "Don't say sorry, do sorry." Actions speak louder than words. From what follows on in today's sermon and in today's communion liturgy, remember that Peter said in John chapter 13, "I will lay down my life for you." And Jesus replies, "Will you?" I'm telling you, before the rooster crows 3 times, you will deny me. We're talking today about allies and co-conspirators. Co-conspirators as a part of our common grammar that we are seeking to establish in our conversations about racial justice in our congregation. So there's at least one word, if not 2, that require a bit of unpacking, and they'll be developed more as we go along through today's service. An ally is, of course, many things. One who is in league with another, one who seeks to act in solidarity with another. An ally doesn't necessarily have all the answers. Being an ally is a lifelong process of learning and listening. But in the context that we're talking about today, an ally is someone who seeks to confront racism on individual and systemic levels. Now, of course, Peter and Jesus wouldn't have used that word in that way. But I would argue today that one of the central stories of the Christian narrative is actually, in a way, about being an ally, what it looks like to be an ally. Jesus, of course, has at least 12 of them, people who can't fully understand his experience, but they try really hard. They give up a lot to be allies: careers, families, futures, They educate themselves. They learn Jesus' ethics. They are witnesses to the kingdom. They are given unique opportunities to extol that witness. Jesus loves his disciples, takes care of his disciples, but he's under no illusions about the disciples. I will lay down my life for you, Peter says. And Jesus retorts, will you? Peter and Jesus are close, very close. Peter is 100% supportive of Jesus almost all of the time. He's there for them. He says he'll do anything. We assume that Peter studied the scriptures. He's read all the right books. We assume that Peter has said many of the right things. He might even have dared to imagine what life might be like for Jesus, taken on an empathic role. He could sometimes see things through the eyes of Jesus. He does from time to time the will of God. He doesn't just talk about it. He is all about it much of the time. He's a great ally. Jesus doesn't give up on him. But of course, Peter said, I will lay down my life for you. I will lay down my life for you. And so the drama in John 18 comes into view. After Jesus had spoken, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Again, he asked them, whom are you looking for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus answered, I told you that I'm he. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave and cut off his ear. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me? Peter pulls out a sword in the garden, but from what we know of Jesus, he appears completely 100% bent against this kind of violence. Put it away, he tells Peter, we assume with a great deal of exasperation. Suddenly, when things were really starting to count, when the narrative is beginning to bubble over, it's like Jesus never rode into town on a donkey, the animal of non-violent surrender, just a few days ago. It was as if Peter still had not absorbed that Jesus' movement was not about an eye for an eye, but was built on a kingdom that was anti-imperial and non-violent. But Peter, the ally, thought when the going got tough that he knew better than the person who was being targeted. He assumed that he knew better than Jesus. And it's worth just for a second tarrying there and saying that again. Peter, the ally, thought he knew better than Jesus. This same Jesus that Peter has seen heal all manner of sickness and walk on water. Peter himself proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah, but now he knows better. Peter, the ally, knows better than the person for whom the soldiers have come. So Jesus is taken away. And the heat is on. It's all falling apart. The whole movement, as far as the disciples can see, is all falling apart. Jesus is arrested. He's about to be executed. And Peter, the ally, finds himself in the court of the high priest. And the woman said to Peter, you are not also one of the man's disciples, are you? He said, I am not. Now the enslaved people and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter was also standing with them and warming himself. Aren't you one of them? I'm not. You wonder what's going through his mind as he stands there next to a fire, warming his hands, staring into the flames. Is his conscience on fire too? For Peter, in that moment, it was suddenly really inconvenient to be an ally. What would it mean for Peter to say that, yes, he was a disciple? Arrest? Humiliation? Would a cross have been fashioned for him as well? If he had said that he was in fact willing to lay down his life as a disciple, in that moment, when it really counted, he would have been charged, we assume. And what would he have been charged with? Surely he would have been charged with conspiracy, with conspiring, with co-conspiring. There's a real risk in speaking up in this moment, a real sacrifice that Peter might have to make if he says, yes, he's with that guy all the way. There's a real cost.
Yeah. And as we start with Black women, we know that no movement is done alone. And so again, thank you for giving us language. The next question is for both of you. You talk about, you make the move from allyship to co-conspiratorship. So the question I want you to sit with is, can you identify, once Dr. Love gives us a definition, can you identify a co-conspirator that you've had in your work? And can you break down for us this difference between an ally and a co-conspirator?
Yeah, so
I bet you can.
So, you know, the book is about like this idea of abolitionist teaching, right? And so, shout out to upstate New York. I'm from upstate New York. You know, we don't like New Yorkers, but that's okay. You know, 'cause when you're from upstate New York, like, where you from? You know, I'm from upstate. Queens? No. Brooklyn? No. Albany? No. I'm from upstate New York. Rochester, New York. 90 miles from Canada, right? And so, you know, so we had abolitionists in upstate New York. That's where I grew up. And the one thing about an abolitionist had to be a co-conspirator. I mean, I want y'all for a second to just think about the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad freed over 100,000 enslaved Africans and Black folks, right? Think about this, there was no Twitter. There was no Facebook, there was no Instagram. This was all off trust and love of each other. And to say that this system of racism and bondage, no more.
Yeah.
We did that. It was everyday people. Farmers, bankers, doctors, teachers, nurses, all ethnicities. We did that as a country. Someone came to your door, gave you a code, you just had to trust them. And so I wanted to bring that back. What would it mean for us in 2019 to think about what it would mean to be an abolitionist and to be a co-conspirator? And in the book, I use James Tyson. Now, many people are not familiar with who James Tyson is. You know Bree Newsom. Bree Newsom was the young Black woman who took that Confederate flag down in South Carolina 8 days after Dylann Roof went into the AME church. And I tell the story in the book because I think this is an important story, because Bree Newsom and James Tyson did not know each other. There were some folks who got together and said, that flag is coming down. They said, and a Black woman's gonna take it down. They taught Bree how to climb. They had Bree's bail money ready. And that morning, Bree Newsom and James Tyson were at an IHOP. They got the word, come take the flag down. Bree Newsom climbs up on the pole to take the flag down. Now, this is where the difference between an ally and a co-conspirator is. James Tyson, now there's a gate for the flagpole. James Tyson isn't standing like outside the gate. Okay, like, Bree, they coming, Bree. Hey, Bree. No, James Tyson, he is inside. And then the police say, you know what? We can get her down. Tase the pole. James Tyson, because he wasn't here, he was here, said, okay. He put his hand on the pole. That white man at that moment understood why he was there. He put his hand on the pole, and he knew that the police would not tase that pole with a white man, healthy white man, right there. He saved her life. That's what it means to be an ally. You can stand out there, and allies know all the language, they read all the books, they come to the meeting with all the terms. right? They read the report before you read the report. Right? I always say allies make black folks feel bad. Like, did you read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book? Like, damn, I didn't read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book. Like, you know, I've been busy being black. Right? So I didn't read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book, but I know it's fire. Right? So they come and they know everything and they good. And then after the meeting, you're like, well, what we gonna do? They go, you're like, they left already? Where'd they go?
I'm gonna call it Uber.
I'm gonna call it Uber, right? So that's the difference between being an ally and a co-conspirator. You know, and this is that back to that abolitionist, is to put something on the line for somebody.
Yeah.
Take a risk to see how to use your whiteness. And I tell folks all the time, whiteness is like a bank. And it just, your ATM card just replenishes itself. So spend it. As the kids say, cash out. Right? Cash out. It's gonna come right back. And so to be a co-conspirator, I try to write in the book, is to take risks for somebody. To put something on the line, but to use it in a way in which where you're using your privilege.
Yeah.
Yes.
Use it. And I'm not just talking about white folks, I'm talking about cisgender folks. Use it for trans folks, like use it for queer folks.
Yeah.
Like, put something on the line, take a risk. It doesn't have to be small risk, big risk. James Tyson simply said here, put his hand on the pole. That's it. And that's what we are talking about with co-conspirators. Allies, they know everything, they can say, they can talk it. But when it's time, they're not there. And if they're there, they're looking at you like, you going? Oh, you going. You go on the front lines, right? Black folks and brown folks, we don't want to fight racism. The Creator did not put me here to fight racism.
Yeah.
If you believe that, that's racist. I should be here and be in my full life and be my full self and my full human.
Yes.
But I gotta fight what y'all created. So they gotta come to the table with something more than just, I read the new book.
Right.
Right? Take a risk.
The journey of Peter suggests that you can succeed again and again, and you will fail again and again in an attempt to co-conspire to advance the cause of justice. And the gospel is that, of course, Peter, to whom the good news is entrusted. Of course, it's Peter to whom the good news is entrusted. After failing and succeeding and failing and succeeding, Jesus hands Peter the keys. Is it not possible that in the pit of Peter's stomach, there was delight in the resurrection and return of Jesus, but there was also some significant amounts of dread? There was going to be a conversation after what happened around that fire pit in the garden, in the courtyard. And if you're Peter, you couldn't have been looking forward to this chat. You might remember this kind of chat with a parent or a principal or someone you really respected, and that gnawing in the pit of your stomach that's eating away at you. It's going to be bad. And it's just a question of how bad, how much you're going to be raked over the coals. The post-resurrection story is that Jesus eats breakfast with Peter. Yes, he eats breakfast, and a new fire is burning, cooking fish. You remember earlier in the courtyard, it's a fire that's burning, the site of betrayal. Now a new fire is burning on a different day, and Jesus sits right next to Peter and doesn't say, well, I'd like to forgive you, but he doesn't say anything about forgiveness because Jesus knows full well at this point that words matter very little. Peter has already said that he was going to follow Jesus to the ends of the earth, that he would lay down his life for Jesus. And then he didn't. So instead of talking about forgiveness, Jesus asks Peter, 3 times he asks, 3 times, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter has denied Jesus 3 times before the cross. Now Jesus offers him 3 chances to say, yes, I love you. And then Jesus ends the dialogue not by saying, I forgive you, but by saying, follow me. And Peter is entrusted to go preach the good news, to be the leader, to be the vessel, to be the one to give voice to the gospel of love. There's a high probability that you will have denied opportunities to co-conspire. Most of us have failed from time to time. We have all chosen moments to sacrifice little. Eating with Jesus remind us again and again. Before and after failure, Jesus comes to dine with us, asking us again and again, before and after failure, to follow once more, to try again, to take this chance to co-conspire. As we gather here today in the sight of God to join in Holy Communion, know that we are only a screen width apart. That the God of all creation is not beholden to the bounds of time or place. God transcends our physical distances, parts the veil between us, and helps us overcome those times where we feel like we may have fallen short, and helps us resolve to do better in the future. Through God and the mystery of Holy Communion, we are joined with creation, one body, one church. In remembering the mighty acts of Jesus, we offer ourselves as living witnesses, called as people of God to wrestle with the nature of our witness according to the testimony and wisdom of the good news. Am I making life better for others? What am I willing to risk for others? Can it be that I am being called not just to allyship, but to co-conspiracy? And so we turn to God in this moment and say that you are holy and blessed is your child, Jesus, your spirit descended upon the Christ child to proclaim good news to the poor, to heal the sick and feed the hungry and liberate the captive. On the night in which Jesus gave himself over, Jesus took bread and he gave thanks to the Creator God and said, take and eat. This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And after dinner, Jesus took the cup and he gave thanks and said, this cup is the new covenant poured out for you and for many. Drink from it in remembrance of me. And so, people of God, let us proclaim the mystery of our faith. Will you repeat after me? That Christ has died, Christ is risen, and Christ will come again. People of God, let us eat and drink. We are the beloved, called to serve, called to co-conspire. Amen.